Just one quick question. Your friends, Michael Hastings and Ibrahim Muthana, have unfortunately died at such an early age. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about them, because hardly any coverage has happened, and do you yourself feel like your safety is in jeopardy?
Just for people that don't know, so Michael Hastings is a very good friend of mine who was a reporter who had been in Iraq for years as a war reporter, and his fiance was blown up in an IED attack in Baghdad, and he wrote a memoir about that, and then he became a correspondent for Rolling Stone, and he wrote a piece about Stanley McChrystal that ended up with McChrystal resigning, where he reported on these statements that McChrystal and his inner circle had made about the president, about the vice president, about other world leaders. And Michael was this sort of tenacious, ferocious, controversial journalist who was sort of a Hunter S. Thompson meets a morally good version of Bob Woodward. I'm sorry, actually Woodward used to be a good person. Michael was this sort of amazing guy, but just to share something personal, the way that Michael and I became friends is that we had some friends in common, and I would see him sort of at bars from time to time, and we sort of knew each other, but we weren't really friends. And he came up to me one time at a bar in Brooklyn, and he said, I feel like you're one of the few people that I could talk to about what happened in Iraq, like all the shit that went down. And started sort of sharing with me some of his experiences as someone living with PTSD. And I've struggled with those issues myself, and we became good friends. And Michael died in a really tragic car crash a couple months ago, and I had just been with him a few days earlier. In fact, we had one of the last times I hung out with Michael, we watched the Floyd Mayweather fight in a boxing match, and we had this sort of fun night out, and then he came with me on this surreal thing where I ended up on the Tonight Show, which is so fucking weird. I had like a live band playing as I come out, and like there was this comedian, Kevin Hart, was there at the same time. It was just so strange to be sitting on the Tonight Show set, and Michael was there because he thought it was so insane that someone like one of us would end up being on a late night talk show. And he died in this car crash. There's been all these conspiracy theories about, did the FBI kill him? Did Stanley McChrystal somehow rig the system, his car, computer system? At the end of the day, I think Michael also, however it was that he ended up, slamming his car into the tree that night, I view him sort of as a victim of the war too. I mean, I think he was someone who was haunted by a lot of demons that he couldn't shake, and that's all I really want to say about him. And then Ibrahim Muthana was this amazing, beautiful, wonderful young Yemeni activist that helped us on our film, that answered a million questions of mine, and he was in his mid-20s, and he died of a heart attack in his bed last week, and he just, I know too many people who've been killed since 9/11, and it's awful, and a lot of them are journalists, and most of them are not famous. They don't report in English. Richard Engel of NBC News, he gets held for like 15 minutes in Syria at one point, and it's like all over the fucking world that Richard Engel's been there. There are Turkish journalists, Syrian journalists, Iraqi journalists, Polish journalists that have been missing for like 2 years in some of these war zones, and no one ever talks about them. There's sort of an inherent racism to the way that we view. We put a value on certain people's lives because of which passport that they carry, and I think it's really kind of disgraceful. Yeah, go ahead.
I was one of the students at the high school that you visited, and it was definitely an honor to have you there. I just wanted to say that. And also, as somebody who's beginning to work on a documentary, can you kind of explain your experience with how you went through the research process and filming, and how you kind of came up with how you wanted to put everything together, and just really like the struggles with all of that and making sense?
I felt like I was on some weird version of the Truman Show. Where I had people following me around all the time, and I hated it. I was always tell Rick, get the fucking camera out of my face, because I'd be like, oh, film this thing, film that thing. He constantly was filming me. lucky he did though, because when we first were shooting this, I kept trying to pressure him away from doing it, but had he not actually filmed me, we wouldn't have actually had that movie. So when I agreed to do this, then we went back to the cutting room floor and we picked up, if I'm offending you with my swearing, I'm really sorry. It's just, you know, I mean, I think part of making I don't consider myself a filmmaker. This is the first time I was involved with something like this. Rick Rowley, who directed this film, is a really amazing guy, and he made other films. He made the first film about the Zapatista uprising, called Zapatista in the early or mid-1990s. He made a film about the Latin Kings called Black and Gold. He made a film called Fourth World War, which was about the anti-corporate globalization protests. He made This Is What Democracy Looks Like, which was about what was called the battle in Seattle in 1999. And he made 30 short films for Al Jazeera since the War on Terror began. And so he's an actually legitimate filmmaker and a guy that knows how to produce these things. I think part of what's happened in our culture is that what's called reality television has pretty much destroyed the verite documentary film world, because people have this strange perception of what reality is when it appears on a screen. And we really struggled with that. I'm like, how do you tell a sincere story? And we ultimately erred on the side, or wanted to err on the side, of being transparent with the viewer and letting them know where we were coming from. And you know, because you know, the idea of you know, capturing reality, when you stick a camera in the face of someone, you're not really capturing reality. So at some level, you have to embrace a part of fiction, because you're engaged in fiction just by putting a camera in someone's face. And so I think, I mean, one of the things I would say to you is that you have to embrace the flaws that are born of putting cameras around people, and not view them as the enemy, but own them. Not try to fudge it to an audience or fake it, but own that. And you know, the idea of research, I mean, you really should, you have to Johnny Steinberg, one of the other winners of the Wyndham Campbell Prize, he's not here tonight, but you know, he's a South African writer, brilliant guy, was talking about sort of his method of telling the story of an anonymous person, someone who's not famous, and meeting with them twice a week for like a year to tell their story. You can't just parachute in, film someone for 3 days and think you understand much about them at all. You have to get down to the nitty-gritty, the nuance of who are these people. Adina and I were on a panel the other night. She did a book about this Palestinian poet, and had to spend all this time getting to actually know who this person is and realize that there's a complexity to everyone and contradictions. And they may try to present themselves in a way that is intellectually honest to them, but isn't actually the truth. And so you have to spend enough time on it, care enough about it, where you're actually putting your whole self into it, so that you say, I feel like I get where this person's coming from, and the flaws of them, and the wonderful things about them, and I want to try to present it in as real a way as I could discover. And that's hard to do. It's really hard to do. But that makes for the best film, I feel.